Today I'm going to be speaking about the context of social entrepreneurship in Southeast Asia and the US. And as Sarah mentioned, this is an adaptation from my MBA thesis, where kind of the culmination of all of our research. So I'm briefly going to discuss what is a social enterprise and kind of what our research question was, get into each of the countries that we conducted interviews in, and then the analysis that was done and some of the different conclusions that we reached. So what is a social enterprise? We defined a social enterprise as a business that is financially sustainable, but at the same time its main purpose is to make some sort of, or was founded on to make some sort of social impact. So different than, say, for instance, Northrop, who does stuff like green energy, which you could argue has a social impact. So this was, but our main focus is still in aerospace, versus something, a company where they were founded to make a social impact. And so these were the ones that we wanted to focus on. And you might have heard the term double bottom line before. So you're looking at your financial and your social results. And so our research question was, how does external factors affect social enterprises? We looked primarily at the government, at social and cultural norms within the different countries, and then what the business environment is like. And so all these external factors have an effect on how social entrepreneurs and how social enterprises act, and they're different for each of the countries. So we went around and conducted interviews in person, so we got to travel to each of these countries, which was really neat. And we found these different companies, and then were able to interview some people from them, or sometimes they're even their founders. So in Thailand, what's neat is they're really big into social enterprises. The government even has an office set up that helps support these enterprises, encourages them to grow, gives them the resources that they need. One of the companies we talked to was a company called Local Alike, and they help connect locals who have certain skills and things to offer to tourists. And so when tourists come, they can actually kind of link up with these folks and they help provide a very unique experience that maybe you wouldn't normally get, especially kind of outside of, say, like a main city like Bangkok. You can kind of get a much more of a unique experience. Singapore. Singapore is probably one of the most developed nations that we went to, aside from the US. They're very business friendly. It's very easy to set up a business there. They too have a big social enterprise. The government supports it a lot. They've had some different acts passed and different organizations set up to help social enterprises. And there was a bunch there that we ended up interviewing. So one of the places we went was a place called 18 Chefs. It's a string of restaurants throughout Singapore, set up by a guy named Benny. He was an ex-convict, an ex-drug user. And when he got out of jail, he had trouble finding a job because of his history. And eventually what he ended up doing is he became trained as a chef and opened up restaurants where now he focuses on hiring people who have that similar background, who have a tough time finding a job and getting the proper training that they need. Moving up to Vietnam. So Vietnam was a lot different. It's not quite as economically developed. It's experienced some inertia in their economy. And on top of that, they have the communist government, so it's a little difficult when you're promoting social enterprises because you don't want to be seen as like the government isn't fulfilling their role to take care of their people. So it was kind of interesting to talk to some of the businesses there that we interviewed. One of them was My Vietnamese Handicrafts. They help local artisans promote like their stuff, help them export and sell their wares basically, and help them, but on top of that, they also help them kind of form their business, help them set up like what sort of prices they should be charging, and in some cases sell on their behalf. And so they even have a store front there that we went to. I ended up buying some stuff, and it was kind of neat because you knew it wasn't just cheap stuff made in China, it was cheap stuff made in Vietnam. But it was made by local people who are trying to, it was good stuff. Malaysia. So Malaysia was kind of interesting in that they're fairly developed, but they're still having some trouble gaining some traction with social enterprises, and they're developed enough that they don't have some of the hardships, so they don't get as much foreign investment, but they also don't have a lot of their own internal foreign investment because they're not as further along as they should be. One of the people that we interviewed was a fund manager at Tandem Fund, and Tandem Fund actually finds social enterprises both within Malaysia and elsewhere, but invests in them. So it was kind of interesting to talk with him and get his perspective on some of the challenges there in Malaysia that they're having, how they're not as far economically, and then some of the other social issues they've been having. And then finally the US. So US, we're fairly familiar with some of the social and business environment that we have here. We support social enterprises. The government has passed some acts that help, and you probably can think of some of the social enterprises that you've heard of. Probably, for instance, Homeboy, I think everyone has heard of. They hire ex-gang members and try to get them out of the gangs and give them on-the-job training, because normally it'd be very difficult for them to go find a job. So what did we learn? So motivation. Everyone that we talked to had a desire to give back. They wanted to make some sort of impact in their community. A lot of them because they came from a similar disadvantaged situation. For instance, the founder of 18 Chefs, like I said, he was an ex-convict. He had trouble finding a job, and now that he has these restaurants, he makes it a point to go out and hire people from that, from a similar disadvantaged background, or from who've just gotten out of jail and who otherwise would have a lot of difficulty finding a job. Foreign involvement, I talked about it a little bit. So we found that the more developed countries, like the US and Singapore, tend to have a lot more foreign involvement in places like Thailand and Vietnam that are not necessarily as developed. We found that the more governments is involved, the more social enterprises you see. And so again, the Thai Social Enterprise Office, some of the different acts within the US and Singapore, you're going to find them more social enterprises where there's more government support. We found that the more developed the economy, the more focused the social efforts were. So in the US and Singapore, you find they're targeting like ex-convicts or gang members, versus in Vietnam and Thailand and Malaysia, it was much more broad, just helping people set up businesses or helping disadvantaged, not necessarily even just in general. And then finally, the way it was marketed. Here in the US, you hear a lot about if a company's has some sort of social focus. Over there, everyone we talked to, they really, even though they cared about what they were doing, they didn't really advertise it or make it known. They felt that, I think, of how it would be viewed, and it just wasn't as big of a deal. So the future of social enterprise, I think as the economies continue to grow, we're going to see more of it. I would encourage you to look for businesses that do that, because next time you're in LAX, go stop by the Homeboy counter that they have there. You're supporting not just a business, but a business that has a good cause. Let me know if you have more questions, because there's a lot to pack into a 5 to 7 minute presentation. And that's it. Thank you.